Hello, here we are.
Hello, we're here. We're doing the thing.
We're doing it. Episode one, the process.
So we just made a short film together, and we're using that as the container to guide this first season of the process. And we're really going to be breaking down how we did that, how we made a short film from beginning to end, while also sharing a little bit about ourselves, our journey, for how we got here. So let's start with that. Let's start with our journeys. Who are you? How did you get here?
Yeah. Do you want to kick us off?
Sure, I can kick us off. My name is Ally Betker. I am a filmmaker, and a freelance creative director based in Brooklyn. My journey is a little bit winding, so I'll do my best to be concise. Um, I went to school for journalism and specifically magazine journalism at Boston University. And when I graduated from college, I started working at fashion magazines, big ones like Vogue and W. And then eventually, somewhere along the way, I kind of plateaued and felt like I wasn't learning as much new things as I wanted to, and I wanted a break from fashion and celebrity content also. And I ended up pitching a travel magazine concept to the luggage brand Away, and I got to make a beautiful travel magazine with an incredible team for like 4 years. And then when the pandemic hit, that project was paused indefinitely, and I was moved onto the creative team as a creative director and basically became a creative director overnight, in the middle of the pandemic, which was definitely interesting and a crash course in a lot of ways. Um, and that's when I started spending time developing commercials and being on set and working with directors. And that is when I really started to not only see that that's what I wanted to do, but it also showed me that it was possible. Because before that, I had never met a director.
Mhm.
Like I didn't grow up
Yeah.
with contacts in the film industry. I didn't know that that was a job that I even had access to. So being exposed to the commercial side of film directing was really solidifying in terms of like putting the steps in place to where I am now.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that just not having that sort of visibility into what different filmmaking roles actually do. I had a very similar path in a lot of ways. But you getting out of college knew what you had an idea of what you wanted to do, even though you ultimately pivoted. I went to University of Michigan. I was an English major. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I wanted to go into publishing or the magazine world, media, but I really wasn't sure. And so, right out of school, lived in Chicago for a year, and then I came to New York, and I had this bonkers opportunity to work for Madonna. I was her an assistant for 2.5 years, which was amazing because it gave me so much exposure to all of these different facets of the creative world from, being on set for music videos, which that was I got to fashion assist on her Bitch I'm Madonna video, which was filmed at the Standard in Meatpacking. And just being on set was it was an overnight shoot. It was so fun. There was just so much activity and, things going on left and right. And that was one of my first moments that I was like, set life is awesome. I really like this.
Mhm.
But it took a while after that. I thought I wanted to go into the art world for a second after I left that job. And then I was like, oh no, I, the art industry is so much less about the art than it is about the financial side of it. And that just was very kind of disillusioning as I went down that path. And then ended up at Inside Hook, this great men's lifestyle publisher that I started working on branded content campaigns, uh, assistant producing, then got into producing, and over time, I was like, this is it. But for so long, I didn't know what a producer was. Like, unless you know from a young age what this industry is for you and you just immerse yourself in it, or you are tied to that community in some ways, like I don't know that people grew up saying like, I want to be a producer, but learning about what this role is, and like I remember I got to be an extra on an episode of High Maintenance. It was at House of Yes, like huge, hundreds of extras. But there was a moment during this shoot that I was like, someone someone controls this whole thing. Someone is in charge of overseeing. And like that to me at the time seemed like such a huge production. And my mind was just blown that like there is someone at the top that is like the puppet master to all of this, like from the creative and from the logistical perspective. And that was this aha moment for me that was like, this is badass and I want to do this.
Yeah, it's so interesting that we both um our way into this world was through commercial filmmaking. And I know for me, there was a while where I was like, oh, I can do commercial filmmaking, but I can't do narrative, or that's different than narrative,
Mhm.
or how do I make the leap to narrative in a way? And really there's so much crossover. Like a production is a production, and obviously there's nuances to the narrative process, which we'll dive way into in future episodes. But kind of realizing what was interesting as part of the process of this short film, which was my first short film, is realizing that I knew so much more than I thought I did because of that experience.
That's something I would love to dive into a little bit more of, like the imposter syndrome
Yeah.
of, you know, like, yes, we have these backgrounds in the commercial world, but it's I think narrative filmmaking, the film industry is so competitive and challenging, and like that, that moment that you're like, yeah, I have this commercial background, but does I don't know that I feel equipped to then make this jump. Or, what if my experience is totally irrelevant? And I definitely have been, fighting it as I've gone along this process. And I'm curious, what your experience has been as you've been making the switch and having those little voices in your head.
Yeah, it's so funny because I probably spent a year getting ready to go freelance. And in that year, I was doing the practical things like building my website and finding an accountant and, those nuts and bolts. But what I also did in that year, maybe by choice, maybe kind of being forced into it, was like really look at my stuff, um,
Mm,
and really, looking at my identity to work and starting to detach from that identity and starting to like build up my belief in myself and start to believe that I had something worth saying and worth sharing. And that was the much harder work to do than
mm,
the building of the website and
mm.
that thing. So yeah, because I kind of had a year transition where I really knew I wanted to go freelance with the intention to start working on my own projects. Um, I kind of had that year to really start wrapping my head around that and doing some um kind of like inner child work, to be honest, around like what are my fears around this and where are they coming from? And it ultimately, for me, roots down to a real fear of being seen and being judged for my creative work and having a
Mm,
ton of fear of putting myself out there as a filmmaker, even as it's what I wanted more than anything.
mm.
It's like how
Yeah.
two things exist at the same time, but they do. Um, yeah, yeah. So it's such an important part of the preparation of like deciding to go for this, deciding to freelance was really yeah, contending with my beliefs around myself and what I was capable of.
And it's interesting. So, you've a ways of major brand, like you've worked on major commercial shoots. You've in your freelance life in the last year, you've worked on major commercial shoots. And so can you speak even a little bit to like what how you see the narrative world as so different in a way that like you it does feel so much more personal, or what, like
Yeah.
how you see it as different in this, how you see it as vulnerable,
Yeah.
maybe.
Mm. There's nothing to hide behind. And this project that we worked on together, I wrote it and directed it, and it was based on personal experience. And if people hate it, it's like I can't be like, oh, the brand made bad choices. It's like it's just
Yeah,
all
it's
out there to
mhm.
be consumed and judged and hopefully loved by some, and that is terrifying.
Yeah, and be to choose such a personal story as the inspiration for your first narrative project. I think there is just so much vulnerability and willingness to really um, share a very personal, intimate part of yourself with the world that um, yeah, I guess you're really not getting in the commercial world.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I mean, if you're lucky, you're getting it in the commercial,
Yeah, yeah.
likely not really.
Mhm.
And maybe I'll use that as a segue to just share what this film is about. So this short is called Permanent Scar, and it's a short about grief and the long-term effects of losing someone early in life. So it is unfortunately based on a personal experience. My partner lost a very close family member last year, and I sort of bore witness to the grief that I saw in him and the rest of our family, and um, was really thinking a lot about how this event, this super tragic loss of life, was going to impact the people that I love so much um years from now, and what would happen because of this event. And that was how Permanent Scar was born. I basically came home um from the trip that we took back to Sydney to for the funeral and the weeks that followed, and wrote the script and wrote the treatment. Obviously, a very rough draft of all those things, but it really was kind of immediate. I think the the output from that experience, and it really was a way for me to process kind of everything that I had just witnessed. So yeah, that's a bit about the film.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's, we met over the summer. I think we first met in July, and it was a little bit of a get to know you coffee. And then also like what are we both working on as we're in these similar phases, just starting out into the freelance world. And we talked about the project a little bit. And I think even at that time it was still, you were still working it out in your head, but just sharing what you just shared, the personal experiences that's driving this, and then seeing how grief manifests in different people and just the million different ways that can happen and how that inspired the film. Even I signed on before I read a script. I read a treatment, but like the way that you presented this story, and just how what a beautiful reflection on the nature of grief, I think really got me on board, very, very immediately before even really, looking at a script. Just um I as I'm going down this path, I sort of have this idea of, what are the projects I'm going to take on? How do I make that decision? And I think the sort of three criteria that I've landed on are: is it a great story? Is it going to make, is it an opportunity to make great connections with other filmmakers I want to work with? And am I making any money off of it? it's sort of that triangle of two out of three that you always want to have when you take something on. And this, um, phenomenal story. I felt moved by it immediately and was just so excited to work with you and start building that relationship. And so I think it really felt like a no-brainer to come on board because I felt so strongly about the potential.
And I remember our next meeting, after that meeting, you came with your big black book and you were like, I have
Yeah,
questions,
I have questions. Yeah.
like, oh my God. Um, I was like, I love this girl.
Yeah,
Um,
I tell people, I'm like, all right, once we have the conversation and we agree that we're going to do this, like, my job is to push you to
yeah,
make this because that's what I'm here for is to like push this project forward and get things done. So like, anytime I've worked with someone on a narrative project or a creative project, I've been like, you need to know that like
yeah.
I'm gonna be drilling you. I'm gonna be pushing.
I really think the big shift for me in 2024 was that collaboration piece, like allowing people in, allowing myself to be seen, showing work before it was perfect. That every time I shared the script with you, I had to like really like talk to myself, talk to that inner child and be like, it's gonna be okay. She's not gonna like every time I was like, she's gonna bail. She's gonna see the script and she's
Oh,
gonna like, nope, I'm out now. Like the script hasn't progressed enough and now I quit. Like every time, and that had nothing to do with you. It just had to do with like getting used to the idea of collaborating with someone. The nature of that is that you are revealing yourself
mhm.
in ways that are not perfect, that are vulnerable, and having to trust someone to be able to like hold that and carry it with you and not judge you. And that is so hard. But for me, I feel like, yeah, one of the biggest takeaways from last year is like, I'm never doing anything alone ever again. Like, and I feel like when I tried to do things alone for the few years that I was, grinding away at scripts and things kind of in the background, they never went anywhere because I didn't have that power of collaboration to really bring things to fruition.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a big, I think, note I would have for filmmakers just starting out is like get a producer.
Oh yeah.
Like get a producer because it's even like if it's just a friend who has good into instincts and like provides good feedback, like and is somewhat organized. Because as a director, you're doing you have a million creative decisions to make and a producer is there to like help bounce those ideas off of, help guide a little bit, but then also to like take care of all the logistical things so that um you're you can really focus on the creative vision and the actors and it's someone to help you kind of keep pushing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, the first time you shared the production plan with me, I was like, oh, because that's just like my brain doesn't work that way. Like it just doesn't. But again, like having someone be like, this is when you need to have your casting brief in. I'm like, okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
But only because
Yeah.
you told me to.
And
Yeah.
I love telling people what to do.
Well, you're good at it because you do it in a way that is very like firm but kind. And I also, the power of working with someone else. I actually remember one email specifically from you. We were like in the midst of pre-production and there was a ton going on. And it was a week where there was like, we had to get a million briefs done and maybe we were locking casting, a bunch of stuff. I can't remember. It was a big week. And it was towards the end of the week and you sent me an email responding to all the various things. And at the end, you wrote something like, you know, you had a lot of deliverables this week. You did a really good job. And I was like, ah, like, thank you. It really meant a lot to me. And I like ended that week smiling because of that. And that's again, like working with a collaborator someone's going to push you and tell you when things aren't working, but they're also going to tell you when you did a good job. And that's very helpful and powerful because the filmmaking process is long, and it takes some grit to keep going, and having someone, both pushing you and being your cheerleader, which I think you do very well, is really not to be overlooked.
Oh, well, I'm glad that struck you in that moment. I think like just being in the professional world for as long as I have, I've just realized like the power of positive reinforcement and acknowledging work well done, people's hard work just goes such a long way.
Yeah. And I think that really speaks to this fact that we are both in our 30s and making this pivot and probably have some hangups about that and being worried that we're behind and what would have happened if I had gone to film school and started when I was 23 and all of this stuff. And yet, we're not student filmmakers. Like, we have been in the professional world for a long time, and that skill is something that was born of working in the industry for, 10 plus years. And so there are a lot of like soft skills and creative skills and problem solving skills and communication skills that we have and can bring to the table because we are in our mid 30s and we've been working professionals for, a decade and a half. Um, and which makes me feel like, we would have been learning all of that stuff all along while also learning filmmaking, like we are certainly um ahead of the game in that sense, I think,
Mhm.
for me being like a first time filmmaker.
I think also coming into this at this stage, like shit, if I was a PAing on sets as of 23, like I might be so burnt out at this point that I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, production, like I'm like, yes, I'm so excited. I love this. I think there's just like a freshness to and like an energy
Yeah.
into this at this stage that um is really valuable.
Yeah. And kind of a lethal combo, like having that professional authority with this like energy and like youthfulness and like kind of something to prove, like catch up, like together. It does feel like things have moved really fast.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think there's reassurance in also having met someone who is on a very similar path and
Mhm.
timeline. And just like kind of reinforcing like, okay, this isn't so crazy.
Yeah, totally. Totally. If she's doing it, I can do it too. And I
Yeah.
think the other thing that's nice about it is that we're both in a similar place where we're balancing freelance work as well. Because I think one thing that's important to talk about is like the reality of how do you make this work, like neither one of us were born into like filmmaking families. We're very much like figuring this out and having to like make a living while also starting out in filmmaking and not making money from our films just yet.
Mm.
um, so we're both freelancing. And I think because we're both in that situation, there's a lot of grace around scheduling and understanding what the juggle of all of this looks like, and the reality of, we have to put time into our freelance work in order to make money to live and also to make our films and
Mhm.
all of that stuff. And yeah, it's really nice to be just on the same page there because there is just a lot of understanding, I think.
I think we're also both lucky that we're freelancing. Our freelance work is relevant as
Mhm.
to the
Yeah.
filmmaking work. And so it's the two can just kind of inform one another and, work is elevated all around through, looking at commercial work through a more of an artful lens or having the big commercial DPs, editors, production folks that are also really interested in making narrative work, but haven't maybe had a lot of opportunity in that space. And so there's really helpful crossover between the two.
100%. 100%. And I know I have been vocal with my freelance clients about my film, and the support and excitement I've gotten from that side of things has also been really nice. So yeah, it's a balance and a dance, but I know I'm so happy balancing all of that, and it's so much more aligned for me than being in a full-time
Mhm.
corporate role. So it certainly takes, it's a skill set of its own to balance all of that, but um, well worth it.
Mhm. Yeah.
What are
Uh,
we going to talk about next time?
so, each episode will be kind of built around a step in the process. So, today we talked about how we got into this crazy world. Next week, we're going to talk about the script and treatment development process for permanent scar as a way to kind of talk about what that process looks like in a bigger sense. And it was a very collaborative process. I'm very excited to kind of talk about the ins and outs of it. And then after that, we'll talk about pre-production. We'll talk about production, getting into post and the festival world, and that, every step of the way, there's just so much to learn.
And I think in addition to sharing this information with others, it's really this process happened quick. Like permanent scar, we were working at a pace. So it'll be nice for us to really go back and talk through everything, and maybe learn things about the process that we haven't quite articulated yet, and also just, you know, refresh for ourselves like what the heck just happened? How did we do that? Because we did. So it's exciting.
All right. So I will see you back here
See you back here.
in a couple of weeks. Thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thank you. See you next time.